Citizenship on the Go. Lesson 5. American History. International Wars. Part 5. Communism and Conflict in Asia. Before World War II, Eastern Europe had gone through a dramatic change in its systems of government and economy. After the First World War, a new communist government was installed in Russia. The old ruling class was removed from power, and many upper and middle class Russians were labeled as public enemies by the new government. More than 2 million people fled Russia in the early days of the communist regime. Former officials, educators, church leaders, and other members of the Russian upper and middle classes who didn't flee were largely imprisoned, killed, or forced into hard labor by the new government. The Russian Empire was over, but a new power had taken its place. The Soviet Union, or USSR, combined Russia and many neighboring lands under a communist government in which supposedly all citizens would have an equal share in the economy. During World War II, the Soviet Union was actually a U.S. ally, helping oppose Germany, Japan, and Italy. After the Second World War, however, tensions between the USA and the Soviet Union grew to the point that the government of each considered the other the biggest threat to their way of life. A long period of time called the Cold War began, in which the USA and the USSR each tried to stop the other from gaining more world power and influencing other governments to adopt their preferred ideologies. The Cold War was not a literal war, since the US and Soviet militaries didn't meet on a battlefield or use physical weapons like bombs and guns to kill each other's enemy soldiers. The Cold War was a fight of ideas. The political system of the United States is called representative democracy. In a representative democracy, citizens elect officials who make laws and carry out the other functions of government. The political system of the Soviet Union, on the other hand, was called communism. The communist government of the Soviet Union claimed to be giving all the people of the nation an equal voice, but in reality, for several decades, the Communist Party that rose to power took strong measures to silence any opposing views and violently quashed public protests and attempts to petition the Soviet government. The economic systems of the United States and the Soviet Union were also very different. The USA had a capitalist economy, with privately owned businesses that competed with one another for profit, while under the Soviet Union's communist system, the government owned everything, determining what would be produced, how it would be produced, who would do it, and what the prices would be. As the Soviet Union expanded to include more and more of Eastern Europe and Asia, the government of the United States grew very concerned that its totalitarian communist government would spread to the rest of the world. At the same time, as the United States grew its military presence and economic influence around the globe, the government of the Soviet Union became concerned that the US's capitalist system of economy would spread everywhere. Because of these differences, during the Cold War, the main concern of the United States became stopping the spread of communism. While the US was mainly concerned with communism, the Soviet Union was concerned with stopping capitalism. Both nations saw themselves as threatened by the other and built up their militaries in order to be ready in the case of an attack from their primary rival. Civics test question. During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? Communism. The main concern of the United States during the Cold War was stopping the spread of communism. The rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War led to U.S. military involvement in some conflicts between communist and anti-communist movements. One such conflict was the Korean War. The Korean War was fought in East Asia after a faction that wanted the Korean peninsula to have a communist political and economic system tried to take over. When anti-communist Koreans resisted the takeover, a civil war began. Communist nations such as the Soviet Union and China sent troops and supplies to assist the communist side of the civil war, while anti-communist nations like the United States and Great Britain sent troops and supplies to assist the anti-communist side. The Korean War tore the peninsula apart, resulting in the deaths of thousands of soldiers and over 1 million civilians. Neither side ever had a decisive victory. Today, the Korean peninsula remains sharply divided in two. North Korea has a purportedly communist political and economic system. South Korea's political system is a representative democracy, and its economic system, like that of the US, is a capitalist or market economy. Another major conflict the US military entered in the 1900s because of the American government's concern about the spread of communism was the Vietnam War. During the Cold War, in the Asian country of Vietnam, as in Korea, pro-communism and anti-communism factions arose to battle each other for control. The French Empire had controlled Vietnam for many decades, but a revolution arose that aimed to expel the French and adopt a communist system of government. The revolution was mostly successful, but anti-communist factions in Vietnam opposed the new government. The Soviet Union and other pro-communist nations sent aid to Vietnam's communist government. The United States sent aid to the anti-communist opposition. The Vietnam War lasted 20 long years. As the war stretched out, the military of the United States began using the Selective Service system to draft men to serve as soldiers. In the United States, all men between the ages of 18 and 26 must register for the Selective Service. During the Vietnam War, in what's called the draft, many men age 18 to 26 who had registered for the Selective Service as required by law were picked at random to serve in the military. Even though the US sent more than 500,000 soldiers to Vietnam over the course of the war, there was no sign that victory was on the horizon. As more and more young American men died abroad for a war that looked like it would never end, the draft and the war itself grew increasingly unpopular. Popular campaigns to lower the voting age in the United States gained strength during this time. Even though all men in the US were required to register for the Selective Service at age 18, when the Vietnam War began, US citizens could not vote in federal elections until their 21st birthday. This meant that many men who were drafted to fight in Vietnam at the age of 18, 19, or 20 had to serve in the US military before they were allowed to vote. This situation struck many Americans as unfair. People protested and petitioned the government to create an amendment to lower the voting age to 18, the same age that men are required to register for the Selective Service. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote was a popular slogan with protesters who spoke out against the policy of drafting people too young to legally participate in elections. While the Vietnam War was still being fought, the two parts of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, were convinced to create an amendment to the Constitution lowering the voting age to 18. The amendment was quickly ratified by a majority of state legislatures, and it became federal law that citizens 18 and older can vote. Despite this important change to the Constitution, the Vietnam War remained very unpopular in the United States. A couple years after the voting age was lowered to 18, the U.S. military left Vietnam. The communist side of the Vietnam War won, and Vietnam as a whole officially became a communist country. Civics test question. When must all men register for the Selective Service? When must all men register for the Selective Service? Between 18 and 26. In the United States, all men must register for the Selective Service at the age of 18, or between the ages of 18 and 26. Civics test question. How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? 18 and older. U.S. citizens have to be at least 18 years old to vote for president, or to vote in any other federal election. Civics test question. There are 4 amendments to the Constitution about who can vote. Describe one of them. There are 4 amendments to the Constitution about who can vote. Describe one of them. Citizens 18 and older can vote. One of the 4 amendments to the Constitution about who can vote says that a citizen who is 18 or older can vote. Other amendments to the Constitution about who can vote say that you don't have to pay to vote, that women and men can vote, and that a male citizen of any race can vote. The Cold War ended around the start of the 1990s, when the Soviet Union disintegrated. The communist system in Russia and in other Eastern European countries was replaced by other systems after a series of popular revolutions and protests, and the United States' main concern was no longer the spread of communism. In 1990, however, a different kind of conflict arose in Western Asia, also known as the Middle East, around what's called the Persian Gulf. A gulf is a narrow area of ocean surrounded by land on 3 sides. The Persian Gulf is bordered by several Middle Eastern countries, including Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The United States became involved in the conflict known as the Persian Gulf War because of economic and political ties to the nation of Kuwait. Kuwait is a large producer of petroleum, and the U.S. oil industry has long been in close partnership with the Kuwaiti oil industry, encouraging connections between the 2 countries' governments. In 1990, the country of Iraq invaded Kuwait, claiming that since Kuwait had been a part of the Ottoman Empire before World War I, the Kuwaiti territory had always really belonged to Iraq. Fights between Kuwait and Iraq over who could drill for oil where and how much also encouraged Iraq to invade. With the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the Persian Gulf War, also more simply known as the Gulf War, began. Because of American partnerships with Kuwait, and because many nations of the world were concerned that if unchecked, Iraq would move on to invading more oil-producing countries around the Persian Gulf, the U.S. government joined forces with 41 others to demand that Iraq withdraw from Kuwait. Iraq refused to withdraw, and the militaries on the Kuwaiti side of the conflict sent aircraft to drop bombs on the occupying force. Less than 5 days after the bombing began, Iraq surrendered, and the Gulf War was over. Kuwait has remained independent of Iraq to this day. Civics test question. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. The Gulf War. The United States fought in several wars in the 1900s. Wars involving the U.S. military in the 1900s include World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War. Partly because of conflicts which had taken place even before the Gulf War, partly because of U.S. actions during the Gulf War, partly because of the military presence the United States maintained in the region afterwards, and partly because of international policies put in place by the U.S. and allies to limit the possibility of another Iraqi invasion, people in many Muslim-majority Middle Eastern countries came to increasingly resent the United States as an unwelcome influence in their part of the world. By the early 2000s, many Muslim people in West Asia, whether government heads, military commanders, religious leaders, or regular civilians, saw the U.S. as a crushingly powerful enemy force trying to control the Middle East and wipe out the Muslim way of life. A terrorist group made up of people who saw America as the enemy began threatening to attack the United States if the U.S. did not meet their demands, which included the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from the Middle East. The U.S. did not remove its military from the region, and the terrorist group publicly announced it considered itself to be at war with the United States. On September 11th, 2001, the terrorist group succeeded in carrying out an attack that shocked not only people in the United States, but all over the world. Terrorists are people who use murder and violence to try to frighten governments into doing what they want. The more horrific and unexpected the attack, the better it is at inspiring terror. So terrorists usually attack civilians in peaceful settings. That is what happened on September 11th, 2001, when members of the terrorist group that wanted the U.S. military to leave the Middle East hijacked 4 passenger planes and aimed them at various important buildings in the United States. One of the hijacked planes did not hit its target, but it still crashed, killing everyone aboard. Another plane was rammed into the U.S. military command center called the Pentagon, killing almost 200 people. The other 2 planes were both crashed into the twin towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Nearly 3,000 people died in the collapse of the towers in New York City. Thousands more were injured. Not only did the passengers on the planes and in the upper levels of the World Trade Center at the time of the attack die immediately, but many people who happened to be nearby were caught by falling debris, and many first responders like firefighters, police, and paramedics who rushed to the scene to help died or were seriously injured as they entered the danger zone. While the crashes in New York City are what most Americans alive at the time remember most vividly about September 11th, 2001, they were only one part of a major event. In general terms, on September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States. Terrorists attacked New York. Terrorists attacked the Pentagon. And terrorists tried to attack Washington, D.C. The terrorist attacks of 2001 continue to have an effect on U.S. military activities and international relations to this day. Civics test question. What major event happened on September 11th, 2001 in the United States. What major event happened on September 11th, 2001, in the United States? Terrorists attacked the United States. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists attacked civilian and military targets in the U.S. states of New York and Virginia. Terrorists also attempted to attack the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C. Thousands of people in the United States died as a result of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. This is the end of Lesson 5 of Citizenship on the Go.